Now, let's begin. Drew Fowler stood in the hospital corridor, his 5-year-old son Justin's hand clasped tightly in his own. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that familiar sterile glow he'd come to associate with loss. 6 months ago, he'd walked these same halls after they told him Victoria was gone. 6 months since the police knocked on his door at 2 in the morning to say his wife's car had gone off Canyon Ridge Road in the rain. The manila folder in his free hand felt heavier than it should. Temporary guardianship transfer papers, the header read. His in-law's lawyer, Chester Rhodes, had prepared everything. All Drew had to do was sign, and Justin would go live with Albert and Esther Preston in their mansion in Bella Vista Heights. The same house where Victoria grew up. The same house she'd been so desperate to escape. "Daddy, I'm tired," Justin mumbled, leaning against Drew's leg. The boy had his mother's dark eyes and quiet demeanor. At 5, he'd already experienced more grief than most adults. "I know, buddy. Just a few more minutes." Drew's mind drifted back to 3 weeks ago, when Albert Preston first suggested the arrangement. They'd been sitting in Drew's small apartment, the one he'd shared with Victoria before she died, the one that now felt like a mausoleum of memories. "You're drowning, Drew," Albert had said, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit probably worth more than Drew's monthly salary as a civil engineer. "We can see it. You work long hours. Justin's in daycare until dark. You're barely keeping your head above water." Esther had nodded, her manicured hands folded in her lap. "We have a space, the resources. Justin could have a stable home, the best schools. You could visit whenever you want." "He's my son," Drew had said. "Of course he is. No one's trying to take him from you." Albert's smile hadn't reached his eyes. "But think about what's best for Justin. What would Victoria want?" That question had haunted Drew for weeks. Victoria had loved her parents in that complicated way adult children often do, aware of their flaws but bound by blood. She'd never spoken ill of them, but she'd also kept her distance. They'd only visited Bella Vista Heights twice a year, always briefly. "There's something wrong with them," she told Drew once, late at night, after one such visit. "I can't explain it. They're my parents, and they love me, but there's something cold underneath. Like they're playing roles." Drew had chalked it up to the usual wealthy family dysfunction. Now, standing in this hospital, he wondered if Victoria had sensed something darker. The past 6 months had been hell. Between his job at Morrison Engineering and caring for Justin alone, Drew was exhausted. The grief came in waves. Sometimes he'd be fine for days. Then he'd smell Victoria's perfume on an old scarf and collapse. The Prestons had been there through it all, offering support, money, childcare. Always generous, always helpful, always watching. That's what finally bothered Drew enough to hesitate. The way Albert's eyes tracked Justin whenever they visited. The way Esther asked detailed questions about the boy's health, his habits, his schooling. The way Chester Rhodes, their family attorney, kept pushing for the guardianship transfer. "It's just temporary," Chester had assured him yesterday. 6 months, maybe a year, until you're back on your feet. We've structured it so you maintain all legal rights. You can revoke it anytime. But Drew had been an engineer long enough to know that temporary solutions had a way of becoming permanent. His phone buzzed. A text from Kelvin Good, his best friend since college. "You sure about this, man?" Drew wasn't sure about anything anymore. He looked down at Justin, who was drawing invisible patterns on the linoleum with the toe of his sneaker. The boy had been so quiet since Victoria died. The therapist said it was normal that children processed grief differently. But sometimes Drew caught Justin staring out windows with an expression far too old for his age. "Mr. Fowler?" Drew turned to see Chester Rhodes approaching, briefcase in hand. The lawyer was younger than Albert, maybe 40, with sharp features and sharper suits. He smiled, but it was the professional smile of someone paid to be pleasant. "Ready to sign? The Prestons are waiting at the house. They've prepared Justin's room. You should see it. Every toy imaginable." Drew's stomach tightened. "I'd like to see my son's room first, before I sign." Chester's smile faltered. "That's not really necessary. The papers need to be filed today, too. Then we'll make it quick. I want to see where my son will be living." The lawyer's jaw clenched, just for a second. "Mr. Fowler, the Prestons have been more than patient. They've offered you an incredible opportunity here. Justin will have everything. I didn't ask for a sales pitch. I asked to see the room. Chester stared at him, and Drew saw something flicker across the man's face. Annoyance? Anger? It passed quickly, replaced by that professional mask. Fine. I'll call the Prestons and let them know we'll be delayed. As Chester walked away, already dialing his phone, Drew felt Justin's hand tighten around his fingers. I don't want to go there, Daddy, the boy whispered. Drew crouched down, meeting his son's eyes. Why not, buddy? Justin looked past Drew, down the hallway, his expression distant. Grandpa Albert scares me. Has he done something to you? The boy shook his head. He just looks at me funny, like I'm a toy, not a person. Drew pulled his son into a hug, feeling the small body tremble against him. Victoria's words echoed in his mind. There's something cold underneath. He was about to stand when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Drew looked up to see an elderly nurse. Her name tag read Ethel Connor. She had the weathered face of someone who'd worked too many double shifts and seen too much suffering. Mr. Fowler? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you. Privately. Drew glanced at Chester, who was still on his phone across the hall. About what? Ethel's eyes darted around nervously. About your wife. Victoria Preston. Drew's heart hammered. What about her? Not here. Ethel pressed something into his palm. A small piece of paper. Meet me in the staff break room on the 3rd floor. 15 minutes. Come alone. She squeezed his shoulder. Please. There are things you need to know before you sign those papers. Before Drew could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the maze of hospital corridors with practiced efficiency. Drew unfolded the paper. In shaky handwriting, it read, Trust no one. Your wife's death wasn't an accident. His hand started shaking. He looked at Justin, then at Chester Rhodes, who was walking back toward them with that professional smile firmly in place. All set, Chester said. We can head to Bella Vista Heights now. Or if you prefer, we could just sign here in... Actually, I need to use the restroom, Drew interrupted. And Justin needs some water. Give us 10 minutes. Chester's smile tightened. Mr. Fowler, the Prestons are expecting. 10 minutes. Drew didn't wait for a response. He scooped Justin up and walked toward the elevators, his mind racing. Victoria's death wasn't an accident. The note could be from a crazy person, some conspiracy theorist nurse who watched too much true crime. But what if it wasn't? The elevator doors opened, and Drew stepped inside, pressing the button for the 3rd floor. Justin looked up at him with those dark, knowing eyes. Are we leaving, Daddy? Maybe, buddy. Maybe. The 3rd floor was quieter, mostly administrative offices and storage. Drew followed the signs to the staff break room, a small space with a coffee maker, microwave, and a few scattered chairs. Ethel Connor was waiting, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her face pale. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice shaking. I almost didn't. I've kept quiet for 6 months, told myself it wasn't my business, but I can't let you give that boy to them. I can't. Drew set Justin down in chair. Stay here, okay? Watch my phone. He handed the boy his cell phone with a game pulled up, then turned to Ethel. What are you talking about? Ethel's eyes filled with tears. I was on duty the night Victoria came in. The accident. They said she lost control in the rain, went off the ridge. But I saw the body, Mr. Fowler. I've been a trauma nurse for 34 years, and I know what accident victims look like. She paused, trembling. The injuries were wrong. What do you mean, wrong? The impact patterns, the bruising, the broken bones, they weren't consistent with going off a cliff. They were consistent with blunt force trauma before the crash. Someone beat her, Mr. Fowler, badly, then staged the accident. Drew felt the room spin. That's impossible. The police investigated. They ruled it an accident. Did they? Or did someone with money and influence make sure it was ruled an accident? Ethel set down her mug. I reported my concerns to the attending physician, Dr. Marcus Chun. He told me I was overwrought, seeing things that weren't there. 2 days later, I was transferred to a different ward. The files on Victoria's case? Sealed by order of the medical examiner. I tried to push, try to get someone to listen, but she shook her head. I'm just a nurse. Who's going to believe me over the Prestons? The Prestons? Drew's voice was barely a whisper. Your wife's parents are very prominent in this city, Mr. Fowler. Albert Preston has been on the hospital board for 15 years. His wife Esther was a major donor when we built the new pediatric wing. When I tried to raise questions, I was told very clearly to drop it. I have 2 years until retirement. I couldn't afford to lose my pension. Drew sank into a chair, his mind reeling. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw you in the hallway with those papers. I know what they're trying to do. They'll take your son, Mr. Fowler, and then... She didn't finish the sentence. Then what? Ethel looked at Justin, who was absorbed in the phone game, then back at Drew. I don't know for certain, but I know this. Victoria was terrified of her parents in the days before she died. She came to this hospital 3 times in her last month, always asking to see me specifically, always nervous. The last time, she tried to tell me something, but someone called her phone and she left. She was dead a week later. Drew's hands clenched into fists. What did she want to tell you? I don't know, but she mentioned her father's research. Something about genetic testing in children. She said she'd made a terrible discovery about her family. Ethel reached in her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. After she died, this was delivered to my home address. No return address, but the handwriting is Victoria's. Drew took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single photograph, old, faded from the 90s based on the quality. It showed a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing in what looked like a laboratory. The girl bore a striking resemblance to Victoria. On the back, in Victoria's handwriting, this is me, but I don't remember this place. Mom and Dad won't tell me where this was taken. They get angry when I ask. Ethel, if anything happens to me, please protect Justin. Don't let them take him. They're not who they seem. Drew's vision blurred. He looked at his son, still playing on the phone, oblivious to the darkness closing around them. I don't understand. Neither do I. But I know your wife was afraid, and now she's dead. And I know the Prestons have been very eager to get custody of your son. Ethel stood. I can't prove any of this, Mr. Fowler. I'm just an old nurse with suspicions and a photograph. But I had to warn you. Don't sign those papers. Not until you know the truth. Drew stood, pocketing the photograph. Thank you. For telling me. For caring. What will you do? I don't know. But I'm not giving them my son. He collected Justin and headed back to the elevator, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. Chester Rhodes was waiting in the main hall, tapping his watch impatiently. There you are. Really, Mr. Fowler, the Prestons are very disappointed by these delays. Tell them I need more time to think. Chester's professional mask slipped. You've had 6 months to think. They've been incredibly generous, incredibly patient, and you're repaying them with. I'm repaying them by being a father. Justin stays with me. The answer is no. The lawyer's expression hardened. Mr. Fowler, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The Prestons have been documenting your struggles, your work schedule, your financial situation, your son's declining performance at daycare. If you force their hand, they can petition for custody through the courts. This way is much cleaner, much easier for everyone. Is that a threat? It's reality. Think about what a judge will see. A struggling single father versus stable, wealthy grandparents who can provide everything the child needs. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Drew's jaw clenched. He wanted to punch the smug look off Chester's face, but he had Justin to think about. I'll consider it, but not today. He walked toward the exit, Justin's hand in his heart pounding. Behind him, he heard Chester on the phone. He's refusing to sign. Yes, sir. I'll handle it. Drew reached the parking lot, the evening air cool against his flushed skin. He unlocked his old Toyota, strapping Justin in his car seat. As he slid into the driver's seat, his phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. Drew hesitated, then answered. Hello, Mr. Fowler? A woman's voice, professional and cold. This is Dr. Marissa Cotton from Belle Vista Memorial. I need you to bring Justin in for a consultation. It's urgent. What kind of consultation? Your in-laws have requested a comprehensive medical evaluation. Given their concerns about the boy's welfare, we need to. Drew ended the call. They were already moving, already trying to build a case against him. His phone buzzed again, Albert Preston this time. Drew sent it to voicemail. He started the car, pulling out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, he saw Chester Rhodes standing in the hospital entrance, phone pressed to his ear, watching them drive away. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Justin asked. "I'm not sure yet, buddy, but somewhere safe." As Drew merged onto the highway, his mind was already working through the variables like an engineering problem. Evidence. He needed evidence. If Ethel was right, if Victoria had been murdered, there would be proof somewhere. And if the Prestons were behind it. He glanced at the photograph on the passenger seat. A little girl in a laboratory, looking confused and scared. Victoria had left this breadcrumb for a reason. Drew's phone rang again. Another unknown number. He let go to voicemail. He needed help. Someone he could trust. Drew pulled over at a gas station and dialed Kelvin Good. "Drew? What's going on? Did you sign?" "No. And I'm not going to." "Kelvin, I need your help. Can you meet me at your place?" "Of course, man. What happened?" "I'll explain when I see you." "But Kelvin, if anyone asks, you haven't heard from me." "Not my in-laws, not their lawyer, nobody." There was a pause. "Drew, you're scaring me." "Good. I'm scared too. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Drew ended the call and pulled back onto the road. His hands were steady on the wheel, his mind clear despite the fear coursing through him. He'd spent 6 months in a fog of grief, letting others make decisions, letting the Prestons guide him. That was over now. If they'd killed Victoria, if they wanted Justin for some reason he didn't yet understand, Drew would find out why. And then he would make them pay. But first, he needed to keep his son safe. Everything else could wait. Kelvin Good lived in a modest duplex in the Richmond district, a neighborhood of mixed industrial buildings and working-class homes. Drew had met Kelvin in their freshman year at State, bonding over late-night study sessions and a shared love of problem-solving. While Drew had gone into civil engineering, Kelvin had pursued computer science, eventually landing a job at a cybersecurity firm. If anyone could help Drew navigate this mess, it was Kelvin. Drew pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. Justin was half asleep in his car's seat, exhausted from the emotional day. Drew carried him to the front door, which opened before he could knock. Kelvin stood there in his usual t-shirt and jeans, his dark hair disheveled, concern etched across his face. "Get inside. Now." Drew stepped into the familiar living room. Gaming posters on the walls, computer equipment scattered across every surface. Kelvin locked the door behind them and immediately drew the curtains. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on?" Drew set Justin down on the couch. The boy immediately curled up, clutching the stuffed bear he'd carried since Victoria died. Drew turned to his friend and, for the first time since Victoria's death, told someone the whole truth. He spoke about Ethel Connor's warnings, the photograph, Victoria's fear in her final days. He talked about the pressure from the Prestons, Chester Rhodes's barely veiled threats, the suspicious timing of everything. Kelvin listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Jesus, Drew," he finally said, "you think they killed her? Your own in-laws. I don't know what to think, but too many things don't add up. The way Victoria died, the rush to get guardianship of Justin, that photograph." Drew ran his hands through his hair. "Kelvin, I need help. I need to find out what really happened. What do you want me to do? You work in cybersecurity. You know how to find information, how to dig without leaving traces. Can you look into the Prestons? Find out what Albert's research involves, what connections they have, anything that might explain why they'd want Justin so badly." Kelvin nodded slowly. "I can try. But Drew, if they really are behind Victoria's death, if they have enough influence to cover up a murder, you're playing a dangerous game. What choice do I have? Run forever? Let them take my son? No, you're right. We fight." Kelvin moved to his computer setup. "Give me everything you know about them. Full names, businesses they're involved in, properties, everything." Drew recited what he knew about the Prestons. Albert's medical research company, Biogenesis Solutions, their estate in Belle Vista Heights, Esther's foundation work, their board positions at various hospitals and research institutions. As Kelvin's fingers flew across the keyboard, Drew's phone buzzed incessantly. More calls from unknown numbers, texts from Chester Rhodes demanding he return to the hospital, a voicemail from Esther Preston's trembling voice. "Drew, please. We're just trying to help. Why are you doing this?" Drew silenced the phone and sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. He hadn't slept properly in days, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. Drew! Kelvin's voice pulled him back. Look at this. Drew moved to stand behind his friend, looking at the computer screen. Kelvin had pulled up a series of news articles from 15 to 20 years ago. Biogenesis Solutions was involved in some controversial research in the late 90s and early 2000s, Kelvin said, scrolling through the articles. Gene therapy, experimental treatments for genetic disorders. They got shut down by the FDA in 2003 after allegations of unauthorized human trials. Human trials on who? Children. Kelvin clicked on another article. There were rumors they were testing on kids in foreign countries, using orphanages as recruiting grounds. Nothing was ever proven. The company settled out of court and all the records were sealed. Albert Preston managed to rebuild his reputation by 2008, started a new, more legitimate research division. Drew stared at the photograph Victoria had left behind. A little girl in a laboratory. What if that girl is Victoria? What if the Prestons experimented on their own daughter? That's a hell of an accusation. It would explain why she didn't remember it. If they did something to her when she was young, modified her memories somehow. Drew's engineering mind started connecting dots. What if Justin inherited something from her? Some genetic marker from their experiments? What, that's why they want him? Kelvin pulled up another search. Biogenesis Solutions is currently working on something called Project Genesis, a gene therapy program for inherited disorders. According to their public filings, they're in phase 2 trials, pending FDA approval. What kind of disorders? Doesn't say. The details are all proprietary. Kelvin frowned at the screen. But here's something interesting. 3 of the children in their current trial died last year. The FDA investigated but found no wrongdoing. Want to guess who was on the review board? Let me guess. Someone connected to the Prestons. Bingo. Dr. Wendell Harrington, a former colleague of Albert's. He's also the Deputy Commissioner of the FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Drew felt sick. The corruption ran deep, with tentacles reaching into every institution that should have been providing oversight. How do we prove any of this? We can't. Not without access to their research data, their trial records. Kelvin spun in his chair. Drew, these people have serious resources. If you're right about Victoria, if they're willing to kill their own daughter to protect their research, you and Justin are in real danger. Then I need to be smarter than them. I need to. A loud knock on the door made them both freeze. Drew moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. 2 police officers stood on Kelvin's front porch. Shit, Drew whispered. Kelvin moved to his computer, quickly closing windows and clearing his browser history. What do we do? The knock came again, louder this time. Mr. Fowler? We know you're in there. We just want to talk. Drew's mind raced. If the Prestons had enough influence to cover up a murder, they probably had contacts in the police department. But running would only make him look guilty, make it easier for them to claim he was unstable. I'm going to talk to them, Drew said. You stay with Justin. If anything happens, if they try to take me in, you get my son somewhere safe. Somewhere the Prestons can't find him. Drew! Promise me, Kelvin. His friend nodded grimly. I promise. Drew took a deep breath and opened the door. The 2 officers were young, professional looking. The taller one, a woman with sharp eyes, spoke first. Mr. Drew Fowler? That's me. I'm Officer Trina Hastings. This is Officer Billy Choi. We need you to come down to the station with us. There's been a complaint filed regarding your son's welfare. By the Prestons, I'm guessing. Officer Choi shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we're just following protocol. There are concerns about me keeping my own son? I haven't done anything illegal. We're not saying you have. Officer Hastings interjected. But given the circumstances, Child Protective Services needs to conduct a welfare check. It's standard procedure when allegations are made. What allegations? That you're experiencing a mental health crisis. That you've been acting erratically, making paranoid accusations against your deceased wife's family. That you fled the hospital with your son against medical advice. Drew laughed bitterly. Against medical advice? He's 5 and healthy. There's no medical reason for him to be at the hospital. That's not what Dr. Cotton reported. Dr. Cotton works for the Prestons. They own half the hospital board. Officer Hastings' expression didn't change. Mr. Fowler, the easy way or the hard way, it's your choice. Come downtown, answer some questions, let CPS do their evaluation. If everything's fine, you and your son go home. If you refuse, we have grounds to bring you in on a psych hold and place your son in temporary protective custody. The trap was closing. Drew could see the whole plan now. Paint him as unstable, get Justin into the system, use their influence to ensure the Prestons got custody. Clean, legal, impossible to fight without resources he didn't have. Unless he could turn their own plan against them. All right, Drew said. I'll come, but I want my lawyer present. You can call them from the station. Drew glanced back at Kelvin, who was standing in the doorway with Justin now awake and clutching his leg. Drew knelt down, pulling his son into a hug. Be good for Uncle Kelvin, okay? Daddy has to go talk to some people, but I'll be back soon. Justin's eyes filled with tears. Don't leave me. I'm not leaving you. I'm never leaving you. I promise. Drew kissed his forehead, then whispered in his ear, Be brave, buddy. Like Mommy was brave. He stood and turned to Kelvin. Take care of him. You know I will. As Drew followed the officers to their patrol car, his phone buzzed one more time. He glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number. Don't sign anything. Don't trust the police. Get a lawyer named Wendell Harrington. He knows the truth. E.C. Ethel Connor. The nurse was still trying to help him. Drew memorized the message and deleted it before the officers could see. As he slid into the back of the patrol car, he caught a glimpse of a black sedan parked across the street, its engine running. Through the tinted windows, he could see a figure watching. Harvey Livingston. It had to be. The same man who'd sabotaged Victoria's car. The same man who would now be watching Drew's every move. The game had begun, and Drew was playing from behind. But he'd been an engineer long enough to know that complex problems required careful analysis and patient execution. The Prestons thought they held all the cards. They were wrong. The police station was exactly as grim as Drew expected. Fluorescent lights, worn linoleum, the smell of bad coffee and desperation. Officers Hastings and Choi led him to an interrogation room, a windowless box with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs. Someone will be with you shortly, Officer Hastings said before closing the door. Drew sat alone with his thoughts, running through scenarios. He needed to stay calm, appear rational. Any sign of paranoia or instability would feed the Prestons' narrative. But he also couldn't just roll over and cooperate with a system that was clearly compromised. The door opened 20 minutes later. A man in his 50s entered, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a thick file folder. His name tag read Detective Wendell Harrington. Drew's pulse quickened. This was the name Ethel had texted. But he was also the same Harrington who'd worked with Albert Preston at the FDA. Which side was he really on? Mr. Fowler. I'm Detective Harrington. The man sat down heavily, setting the file on the table. This is quite a situation you've gotten yourself into. I haven't gotten myself into anything. I refused to sign custody papers, and suddenly I'm the bad guy. Harrington opened the file, scanning through pages. According to Albert and Esther Preston, you've been exhibiting concerning behavior for months. Missing work, neglecting your son's medical appointments, making wild accusations about your wife's death. Those are lies. Are they? Harrington looked up, his eyes unreadable. Because I have statements from your employer saying you've been distracted and unreliable. I have reports from Justin's daycare noting behavioral issues. I have medical records showing you canceled 3 appointments for your son's wellness checks. Drew forced himself to stay calm. I work full-time while raising a child alone. Yes, I've been struggling. Yes, I've made mistakes. But I've never neglected or endangered my son. What about the accusations regarding your wife's death? Officer Choi says you claim she was murdered. I said I had questions about the official report. Based on what evidence? Drew hesitated. If he mentioned Ethel Connor, he'd be putting her at risk. If he mentioned the photograph, they'd take it as evidence and it would disappear into the system. He needed to play this carefully. Based on inconsistencies I noticed. Things that didn't add up. Such as, my wife was an experienced driver. She'd driven Canyon Ridge Road hundreds of times. The weather wasn't that bad that night. Light rain, good visibility. Her car was new, well-maintained. It doesn't make sense that she'd lose control. Harrington closed the file. Mr. Fowler, I'm going to be straight with you. I've reviewed your wife's case. The accident investigation was thorough. There's no evidence of foul play. Or the evidence was buried. That's a serious accusation. Who exactly do you think buried evidence? This was the moment of truth. Drew studied Harrington's face, looking for some sign of whose side he was on. The detective's expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. I think my in-laws have more influence in this city than people realize, Drew said carefully. I think when you're wealthy enough, you can make inconvenient questions go away. Harrington was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he pulled out his phone and set it on the table. He tapped a few buttons, and Drew realized he'd activated a white noise app. This conversation is now off the record, Harrington said quietly. The room's recording system has been experiencing technical difficulties. He leaned forward. Ethel Connor sent you to me. Drew's heart raced. You know Ethel? She was my wife's best friend. Died of cancer 3 years ago. Ethel sat with her every day in the hospital. Harrington's eyes were hard. She's one of the few people in this city I trust completely. So when she calls me at 6 in the evening and tells me to keep an eye on the Fowler case, I listen. Then you know the truth about Victoria. I know Ethel has suspicions. I know she's been carrying guilt about your wife's death for 6 months. But suspicions aren't evidence, Mr. Fowler. I need proof. What about your connection to Albert Preston? You work together at the FDA. Harrington's jaw tightened. Albert Preston is one of the most corrupt men I've ever encountered. I spent 2 years trying to build a case against Biogenesis Solutions. Know what happened? My investigation was shut down by people above my pay grade. I was reassigned to local PD, and every piece of evidence I'd gathered vanished. Why? Because Albert has friends in very high places. Senators, judges, agency directors. He's been running illegal medical experiments for decades, and every time someone gets close to exposing him, they either back off or disappear. Harrington pulled out a cigarette, then remembered he was indoors and put it away. I've been waiting 15 years for another shot at him. Drew felt a flicker of hope. Then help me. Help me prove he killed Victoria. It's not that simple. I'm a detective in a small city PD. The Prestons have already filed official complaints. My captain is breathing down my neck to process you through CPS. If I go against protocol without solid evidence, I'll be suspended and you'll lose what little protection you have. So what do? Harrington tapped the file folder. Play their game. For now, submit to the CPS evaluation. Show them you're a fit parent. Don't give them any excuse to take Justin into custody. Meanwhile, I'll dig into Victoria's case from my end. Quietly, carefully. That could take months. I don't have months. Then find me evidence I can use. Something concrete that ties the Prestons to your wife's death. Harrington leaned closer. Ethel mentioned a photograph Victoria left behind. Do you have it? Drew reached into his pocket and slid the photo across the table. Harrington studied it, his expression darkening. This is from the Meridian trials, he said quietly. What? In the late 90s, Biogenesis ran something called the Meridian Project. They recruited children from orphanages in Eastern Europe, told the directors they were providing free medical care. What they were really doing was gene editing experiments. Some of the kids died. Others changed, developed health issues, psychological problems. The project was shut down after an anonymous tip to the FDA, but most of the children disappeared into the system before we could document what happened to them. Drew felt sick. You think Victoria was one of those children? The Prestons couldn't have biological children. They adopted Victoria through a private agency in 1994. Her birth records are sealed. Harrington tapped the photograph. This lab matches the setup at Biogenesis's old facility in Prague. If this is Victoria, it means the Prestons adopted one of their own test subjects. Why would they do that? Control. Long-term study. Who knows? But if Victoria started asking questions about her past, if she discovered what they'd done to her. Harrington didn't finish the sentence. Drew's hands clenched into fists. My son, what if he inherited whatever they did to Victoria? What if that's why they want him? Then we need to make sure they never get him. Harrington turned off the white noise app and pocketed his phone. I'm going to recommend to CPS that Justin remain in your custody pending a full evaluation. That'll buy you some time. But Mr. Fowler, you need to be very, very careful. These people have killed before. They won't hesitate to do it again. I'm not afraid of them. You should be. Albert Preston is a sociopath with unlimited resources. He'll come at you from every angle. Legal, financial, social. He'll isolate you, break you down, and when you're at your weakest, he'll take everything you love. He already did that when he killed my wife. Harrington stood, picking up the file. Then make him pay. But do it smart. Emotional revenge gets you killed or arrested. Strategic revenge gets you justice. As the detective reached the door, Drew called out, "Why are you helping me?" Harrington paused. "Because 15 years ago, I watched a little girl die on an operating table at Biogenesis. She was 8 years old, covered in tumors from the experimental genes they'd spliced into her DNA. Her name was Sophie. She cried for her mother until the very end." His voice was rough with old grief. "I made a promise to that little girl that I'd stop the monsters who did that to her. I haven't kept that promise yet. Maybe helping you is how I finally do." He left Drew alone in the interrogation room. A few minutes later, a woman from CPS arrived, Jean Stevenson, according to her ID. She was professional, efficient, asking questions about Drew's home life, his parenting, his support system. Drew answered honestly, showing no signs of the rage and fear churning inside him. After an hour, she seemed satisfied. "I'm going to recommend continued placement with you, Mr. Fowler, but I'll be conducting follow-up visits weekly for the next month, and you'll need to attend counseling sessions, grief therapy, and parenting support. Whatever it takes." Jean gathered her papers. "Your in-laws have also requested supervised visitation with Justin. I'm inclined to grant that request." "No." Drew's voice was firm. "Not until I have more information about their intentions. Mr. Fowler, they're the child's grandparents. Unless you have specific evidence of danger, I'll file for a restraining order if I have to." Jean's expression hardened. "That would look very bad in my report. It would suggest you're being unreasonably hostile to family members trying to help." Drew realized he was trapped. Refuse the visits and look paranoid. Allow them and give the Prestons access to Justin. He needed a middle ground. Supervised visits in a neutral location, he compromised, with a social worker present. 1 hour once a week. Jean considered this. "I can work with that. But Mr. Fowler, if you miss any counseling sessions, if there are any more incidents, I will revisit the custody arrangement. Are we clear?" Crystal. 2 hours later, Drew was released. Kelvin was waiting in the lobby with Justin, the boy asleep in his arms. "They're letting you keep him?" Kelvin asked. "For now." Drew took his son, feeling the weight of him, the warmth. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." They walked out into the night. The black sedan was gone, but Drew knew Harvey Livingston was still out there, watching, waiting. Drew looked down at Justin's peaceful face and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would protect his son, and he would make the Prestons answer for what they'd done to Victoria. The game had begun, and Drew was going to win. He just had to figure out how. Drew spent the next week in a state of hypervigilance. He moved out of his apartment and into a small rental house on the outskirts of the city, somewhere the Prestons wouldn't immediately think to look. He enrolled Justin in a new daycare under a slightly modified name, paid cash for everything, and varied his routes to work. Kelvin helped him set up basic security, cameras at the doors, alerts on his phone if anyone approached the property. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was something. Meanwhile, Drew attended his mandatory counseling sessions with Dr. Marissa Cotton. Yes, the same Dr. Cotton who worked for the Prestons. He sat through her probing questions about his grief, his paranoia, his relationship with his in-laws, and gave her exactly what she wanted to hear. A man slowly accepting his loss, working through his pain, grateful for family support. It made him sick to play the role, but Harrington had been right. Strategic revenge required patience. On Thursday afternoon, Drew received a call from Jean Stevenson scheduling the first supervised visit with the Prestons. Saturday, 2 p.m. at the CPS offices downtown. Drew agreed, his mind already working on how to use this to his advantage. That night, after putting Justin to bed, Drew sat at his kitchen table with every piece of information he had. The photograph of young Victoria, news articles about Biogenesis Solutions, notes from Kelvin's research. It was all circumstantial, nothing that would hold up in court. He needed more. He needed to get inside Biogenesis, access their research files, find concrete proof of what they'd done to Victoria and what they wanted with Justin. Breaking into a secure research facility was insane. But Drew had always excelled at solving impossible problems. It just required the right approach. His phone buzzed. A text from Kelvin. Found something. Call me. Drew stepped outside and dialed. Kelvin answered on the first ring. Harvey Livingston, Kelvin said without preamble. I've been tracking him like you asked. He's a ghost. No social media. No digital footprint. Pays for everything in cash. But I found something interesting. He owns a body shop in the industrial district. Livingston's Custom Automotive. The same Harvey Livingston who sabotaged Victoria's car owns a body shop. Gets better. Guess who one of his regular clients is? Biogenesis Solutions. Bingo. They've been using his shop for fleet maintenance for the past 8 years. All their company vehicles, including the ones they use for transporting research materials. Drew's mind started racing, which means Harvey has access to Biogenesis facilities. He's probably been inside dozens of times. Exactly. And if you could get to Harvey, get him to talk, or maybe get access to his records. Kelvin trailed off. It's a long shot. It's more than we had yesterday. Drew thought about it. Harvey Livingston was a killer, a man who'd helped murder Victoria and was now helping the Preston stalk Drew. Approaching him directly would be suicide. But maybe there was another way. Kelvin, can you find out Harvey's schedule? When he's at the shop, when he's not. I can try. What are you thinking? I'm thinking sometimes you don't need a key to open a door. You just need to know when the door is unlocked. Over the next 3 days, Kelvin worked his magic. He hacked into Harvey's email. Minimal security. The man was clearly old school. From the emails, they learned Harvey's patterns. He left the shop every day at 6 p.m., didn't return until 8 a.m. the next morning. He lived alone in an apartment 15 miles away. No family, few friends, just a life built around violence for hire. On Tuesday night, Drew put Justin to bed early, called in a favor with his elderly neighbor to keep an eye on the house, and drove to the industrial district. Livingston's Custom Automotive was a squat building with a corrugated metal roof and garage bays that had seen better days. The sign was faded, and only 2 of the security lights were working. It was exactly the kind of place someone like Harvey would operate from. Drew parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows. He'd brought basic tools, bolt cutters for the fence, a screwdriver for the window locks. He'd watched enough crime shows to know the basics. The fence was easy. The window took longer, his hands shaking as he worked the lock mechanism. He kept expecting alarms, security guards, police sirens. But the place was quiet, abandoned for the night. Drew slipped inside, using his phone's flashlight to navigate. The main shop was exactly what he expected. Vehicle lifts, tool benches, the smell of oil and metal. He moved quickly to the office, a small room at the back with a desk, filing cabinets, and an ancient computer. The filing cabinets were locked. Drew used the bolt cutters on the handles, wincing at the noise. Inside, he found what he was looking for. Invoices, work orders, maintenance records for Biogenesis Solutions vehicles. He photographed everything with his phone, hundreds of documents detailing repairs, modifications, installations. Most of it was routine automotive work, but some of the invoices were strange. Modifications to refrigeration units, installation of specialized locks, custom retrofitting of cargo areas. Then Drew found the jackpot. A folder labeled Special Projects Confidential. Inside were blueprints, not for vehicles, but for the Biogenesis facility itself. Detailed layouts showing security systems, access points, laboratory locations. There are also photographs of different areas of the facility, including what looked like an underground level not shown on any public plans. Drew's hands trembled as he photographed every page. This was it. This was evidence that Harvey had been involved in something beyond basic vehicle maintenance. These blueprints would allow someone to navigate the facility, to bypass security, to access restricted areas. Why would Harvey have these unless he needed them for something illegal? Drew was about to close the folder when he noticed one more document tucked in the back. A handwritten note on Biogenesis letterhead. H. Phase 3 ready for implementation. Need transport protocols finalized. Subject JF requires special handling. Sedation recommended. Payment as discussed. EP. Subject JF. Justin Fowler. They were planning to take his son. The transport protocols, the sedation, this wasn't about legal custody battles. This was about kidnapping. Drew's vision blurred with rage. He steadied himself, photographed the note, and carefully returned everything to the filing cabinet exactly as he'd found it. He couldn't let Harvey know someone had been here. As Drew moved toward the window, a sound froze him in place. A car engine, pulling into the lot. Drew killed his phone's flashlight and ducked behind a desk. Through the office window, he could see headlights sweeping across the building. A car door slammed. Harvey had come back. Drew's pulse hammered as he heard the front door unlock, footsteps entering the shop. He was trapped. The office only had one exit, right where Harvey would pass. The windows were too small and high to escape through quietly. The footsteps came closer. Drew pressed himself into the knee space under the desk, barely breathing. Harvey entered the office, flipping on the overhead light. Drew could see his shoes, work boots splattered with what looked like motor oil, but could have been anything. The man moved to the filing cabinets. Drew heard Harvey curse softly. Had he noticed the broken locks? But no, Harvey was opening a different cabinet, rifling through papers. Yeah, I'm here, Harvey said, and Drew realized he was on a phone call. I'm looking for it now. No, I told you, I keep hard copies of everything. I know it's not secure, but I don't trust computers. A pause. Drew could hear another voice on the line, too faint to make out words. Saturday, Harvey said. You want to move on Saturday? That's earlier than we discussed. Yeah, I can make it work, but the price goes up. Fine, fine. Same protocol as the note? Sedation and transport? Where am I taking him? Drew's blood ran cold. They were talking about Justin. About this Saturday, the day of the supervised visit. Biogenesis main facility, underground lab. Harvey continued. Jesus, Albert, that's risky. If anyone traces it. Okay. I trust you know what you're doing. What about the father? Accident? Can you be more specific? I see. Yeah, that'll work. Nobody questions a grief-stricken father losing control of his vehicle. They were going to kill him, just like they'd killed Victoria. Harvey found whatever he was looking for and left the office, still on the phone. I'll have everything ready. Saturday, at 2 p.m. The kid won't know what hit him. The front door closed. The car engine started. Drew remained under the desk for 10 more minutes, making sure Harvey was really gone before he finally crawled out. His entire body was shaking. They'd been planning this all along. The custody battle, the CPS evaluation, the supervised visits, all of it was theater. They were going to take Justin on Saturday, stage Drew's death to look like a car accident, and disappear his son into their research facility. Drew stumbled out of the shop, barely remembering to close the window behind him. He made it to his car before the panic attack hit, his breath coming in gasps, his vision tunneling. Victoria. They'd killed Victoria this way. Trapped her, made her death look like an accident. And now, they were going to do the same to him. But Drew had something Victoria hadn't. Forewarning. He knew their plan, and he had 3 days to turn it against them. He pulled out his phone and called Harrington. The detective answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy. This better be good, Fowler. It's midnight. They're going to take Justin on Saturday, during the supervised visit, and they're going to kill me. Harrington was instantly alert. Slow down. Tell me everything. Drew recounted the break-in, the documents, the phone call he'd overheard. Harrington listened without interrupting. Did you get photos of the documents? Everything. I'll send them to you now. Good. That's good. This is evidence of conspiracy, possibly kidnapping. I can use this. Harrington paused. But Drew, we need to be smart about how we play this. If we tip our hand too early, they'll lawyer up and we'll lose them. What are you suggesting? Saturday's supervised visit. Let it happen. But we control the environment. I'll have backup in the building, ready to move the second they try anything. We catch them in the act. We've got them dead to rights. Drew's hands clenched on the steering wheel. You want to use my son as bait. I want to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Justin will be safe. I'll personally guarantee it. But this is our best shot at taking down the whole operation. The Prestons, Harvey, everyone involved. And if something goes wrong, it won't. I've been waiting 15 years for this. I won't let anything happen to your boy. Drew closed his eyes, weighing the options. Keep running and never be safe, or take the fight to them and end it. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. Okay, but I want body cameras, I want officers in the room, and I want ironclad guarantees that Justin leaves that building with me. You'll have all of it. Trust me, Drew. We're gonna make these bastards pay. After hanging up, Drew sat in his car for a long time, staring at the photos on his phone. The blueprints of biogenesis. The transport protocols. The handwritten note about his son. Subject JF requires special handling. They'd made a mistake. They'd underestimated Drew, assumed he'd be easy to manipulate, easy to break. They'd forgotten that engineers solve impossible problems for a living. Drew started the car and drove home. He had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to make sure that when Saturday came, it would be the Prestons walking into a trap, not him. He glanced at the photo of young Victoria one more time. I'm going to make them pay, he whispered to his dead wife. I promise you, I'm going to make them pay. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, the kind of day that made everything feel normal and safe. Drew knew better. He dressed Justin in his favorite shirt, the one with dinosaurs on it, and explained where they were going. Grandma and Grandpa Preston want to see you for a little while. Justin's face fell. I don't want to go. I know, buddy. But it's just for 1 hour, and I'll be right there the whole time. Okay. The boy nodded reluctantly. Drew could see fear in those dark eyes. The same fear Victoria must have felt in her last days. It made his resolve stronger. Drew's phone buzzed. A text from Harrington. Team in position. 3 officers inside the building, 2 in the parking lot. I'm in the observation room. You'll have a panic button. Press it, and we move immediately. You ready? Drew typed back. Ready. The CPS offices were in a squat government building downtown. Drew parked in the lot, noting the unmarked cars Harrington had mentioned. He carried Justin inside, past the security desk, to the 3rd floor where the supervised visit rooms were located. Gene Stevenson was waiting, clipboard in hand. Mr. Fowler, Justin. Right on time. The Prestons are already here. She led them to a small room with a table, chairs, and a one-way mirror. Drew knew Harrington was behind that mirror, watching. Albert and Esther Preston stood as they entered, their expressions carefully composed into grandparent warmth. Justin. Esther moved forward with outstretched arms. Come give Grandma a hug. Justin pressed against Drew's leg. Esther's smile faltered. He's been shy lately, Drew said. The changes have been hard on him. Albert nodded sympathetically, but his eyes were cold. Of course. We understand. Justin, we brought you something. He held up a wrapped package. Your mother loved these books when she was your age. Despite himself, Justin was curious. He took the package and carefully unwrapped it. A box set of children's books about space exploration. Drew recognized them. Victoria had kept her childhood copies on a shelf in their bedroom. Thank you, Justin mumbled. Why don't you look through them? Esther suggested. Grandpa, and I want to talk to your daddy for a minute. Gene Stevenson intervened. Actually, this is Justin's visit. All conversation should include him. Albert's mask slipped for just a second, annoyance flashing across his face. Of course. You're right. He turned to Justin. Would you like Grandpa to read you one? As Albert began reading, his voice taking on that false cheerfulness adults use with children, Drew watched carefully. Esther had positioned herself near the door. Jean was focused on her notes. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Drew's fingers found the panic button in his pocket. A small device Harrington had given him that morning. One press and officers would flood the room. 20 minutes passed. Albert read 2 books. Esther asked Justin questions about school. Jean observed and took notes. Nothing happened. Drew started to wonder if they'd gotten it wrong. Maybe Harvey's phone call had been about something else. Maybe. Then he smelled it. Something sweet in the air, artificial. Like almonds. Drew's engineering training kicked in. Cyanide smelled like bitter almonds. But this wasn't bitter. This was something else. Something that made his head feel fuzzy, his reaction slow. He looked at Jean Stevenson. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. She swayed slightly in her chair. Jean. Drew stood, but his legs were unsteady. The room tilted. "It's all right, Drew," Albert said, his voice coming from very far away. "Just relax. This will all be over soon." Sedation gas. They'd pumped sedation gas into the room. Drew fumbled for the panic button, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. He saw Esther moving toward Justin, saw Albert pulling something from his jacket. A syringe. "No," Drew slurred. He forced his legs to move, staggering toward his son. "Stay away." The door burst open. Not from Harrington's team, but from a hallway. Harvey Livingston entered, wearing a respirator mask. Behind him, two other men in masks. "Took long enough," Albert said, also pulling out a mask. The father's more resistant than expected. Drew fell to his knees. Through the haze, he saw Harvey lift Justin, saw his son's terrified face, saw the boy reaching for him. "Daddy." Drew's hand found the panic button. He pressed it. Nothing happened. Albert laughed. "Did you really think we wouldn't plan for every contingency? Your detective friend is watching from the observation room." "Yes. Unfortunately, we've locked the doors from the outside. By the time they cut through, we'll be gone." Drew tried to fight, tried to stand, but his body wouldn't respond. He watched helplessly as Harvey carried Justin toward the door. Then Justin did something unexpected. He bit down on Harvey's hand, hard enough to draw blood. Harvey cursed and loosened his grip. The boy twisted free and ran. Not to Drew, but to the window. "Justin, no," Drew shouted, but his voice was weak. The boy didn't jump. Instead, with the presence of mind of someone far older than 5, Justin yanked open the window and screamed, "Help! They're taking me! Help!" His voice carried across the parking lot. And more importantly, it alerted the officers Harrington had stationed outside. Within seconds, Drew heard pounding on the door. Shouting. The sound of something heavy hitting the lock. Albert's expression changed from confident to panicked. "Move! Now!" But it was too late. The door splintered inward. Officers poured into the room, weapons drawn. "Nobody move. Hands where I can see them." Harvey tried to run. He made it 3 steps before an officer tackled him to the ground. Albert and Esther stood frozen, their masks half on, their guilt written across their faces. Harrington entered, taking in the scene. He saw Drew collapsed on the floor, Jean Stevenson unconscious in her chair, the gas canister hidden in the ventilation shaft. He saw Justin standing at the window, tears streaming down his face but still shouting for help. "Drew, can you hear me?" Harrington knelt beside him. "My son," Drew managed. "Is he? He's safe. He's a brave kid. Probably saved all of you." As the sedation slowly wore off, Drew watched the Prestons being read their rights, watched Harvey being dragged away in handcuffs. Jean was being attended to by paramedics, starting to regain consciousness. Justin ran to Drew, throwing his small arms around his father's neck. "I was brave, Daddy. Like Mommy. You were so brave, buddy. So brave." Harrington called for medical assistance for Drew, then began securing the scene. "We've got enough here for attempted kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy. Once we search biogenesis with this as probable cause." But Drew barely heard him. All he could focus on was his son, safe in his arms, alive. They'd won. Not completely, not yet. But they'd won the first battle. The next 72 hours were a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and media attention. The story broke big. Prominent doctors arrested in grandson's kidnapping attempt. And suddenly Drew's private nightmare was public knowledge. Harrington worked fast. With the attempted kidnapping as leverage, he got a warrant for Biogenesis Solutions. What they found in the underground laboratory was beyond anything Drew had imagined. Files on hundreds of children dating back 30 years. Genetic modifications, experimental treatments, outcomes tracked with clinical detachment. 13 current subjects in various stages of trial participation, all of them children under 12. and in a locked office, a complete dossier on Victoria Preston. She had been subject M17 in the Meridian Project, adopted at age 7 from a Romanian orphanage, modified with experimental gene therapy meant to prevent certain hereditary diseases. The therapy had worked, but it had also caused unexpected mutations in her genetic code. Mutations that had been passed to Justin. That's what the Prestons had wanted. Not the child himself, but his genetic material. Justin represented a second generation of their modifications, a chance to study how the therapy evolved across generations. The documents showed they planned to extract bone marrow, tissue samples, possibly organs. Drew felt sick reading the files. Victoria had been their experiment her entire life, and they'd never told her. She discovered the truth somehow, maybe through the photograph, maybe through her own medical records, and they'd killed her for it. The evidence was overwhelming. Harrington arrested 12 more people connected to biogenesis, including the complicit doctors and the research staff who'd known about the illegal trials. Chester Rhodes, the family attorney, was charged as an accessory after they found emails showing he'd helped plan the kidnapping. But the biggest break came from Harvey Livingston. Facing multiple felony charges and looking at 20 years minimum, Harvey made a deal. He confessed to sabotaging Victoria's car on Albert Preston's orders. He described in detail how he'd cut the brake lines, how he'd followed her car that night, how he'd watched it go off Canyon Ridge Road and done nothing to help. It wasn't supposed to be so violent, Harvey said in his deposition, his voice flat. Albert said, "Make it look like an accident. I did what I was paid for." With Harvey's testimony, the prosecutors upgraded the charges against Albert and Esther Preston to first-degree murder. Throughout all of this, Drew focused on Justin. The boy had been remarkably resilient, but Drew knew trauma had a way of surfacing later. He kept Justin in therapy, maintained routine as much as possible, and most importantly, kept him far away from the media circus. Kelvin had been instrumental, helping Drew navigate the attention, fielding calls from reporters, even hiring a lawyer to protect Drew's rights during the investigation. "You stood by me when I needed you," Drew told his friend. "I won't forget that. That's what family does," Kelvin replied. Ethel Connor came forward with her own testimony, detailing her suspicions about Victoria's death and her guilt at staying silent for so long. The hospital placed her on administrative leave, but public sentiment ran strongly in her favor. She'd been the one person brave enough to speak up. Drew visited her at her home, bringing flowers and Justin. "I can't thank you enough," he said. "If you hadn't warned me." Ethel wiped tears from her eyes. "I'm just sorry I didn't speak sooner. If I'd been braver, Victoria might still be alive. Or the Prestons might have silenced you too. You did what you could when it mattered most." 1 month after the arrests, Drew was called to testify before a grand jury. He brought the photograph of young Victoria, the documents from Harvey's shop, and his own testimony about the Prestons' behavior. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning indictments on all charges. The trial was set for 6 months later, but the Prestons' lawyer tried every delay tactic possible. Meanwhile, Biogenesis Solutions collapsed. Federal investigators from the FDA, CDC, and multiple other agencies descended on the facility. The 13 children in active trials were removed and placed in medical care. Victims from previous trials, now adults scattered across the world, began coming forward with their own stories. It turned out the Meridian Project had been even larger than Harrington suspected. Over 200 children had been experimented on across 3 decades. Some had died. Others lived with permanent genetic damage. A few, like Victoria, had seemed normal but carried hidden modifications. Drew connected with some of these survivors through a support group organized by victims' advocates. Hearing their stories, the health issues, the psychological trauma, the years of not knowing why they were different, gave him perspective on what Victoria must have experienced. One woman, Christina Holt, had been in the Meridian Project the same year as Victoria. "I remember her," Christina said when Drew showed her the photograph. "The doctors liked her, said she was responding well to the treatment. Some of us got sick, but Victoria stayed healthy. I always wondered what happened to her. She had a good life," Drew said. "She became an artist. She married someone who loved her. She had a son. She was happy for a while. I'm glad. Some of us never got that. The conversation haunted Drew. Victoria had been one of the lucky ones, and they'd still taken everything from her. The trial began in October, nearly 9 months after the kidnapping attempt. Drew sat in the courtroom every day, watching as prosecutors methodically built their case. Harvey's testimony was devastating, describing in detail how Albert Preston had approached him in 2009 about removing obstacles to his research. He said his daughter was becoming a problem. Harvey testified. She'd found old files, was asking questions. He needed her gone, but it had to look natural. The defense tried to discredit Harvey, painting him as a career criminal looking to reduce his own sentence. But the physical evidence backed up his story. Forensic analysis of Victoria's car showed the brake lines had been professionally cut. Records from Harvey's shop showed unusual payments from Albert Preston in the weeks before Victoria's death. Esther Preston's defense was that she'd known nothing about her husband's plans. But emails recovered from their home computer told a different story. She'd been actively involved in planning the research protocols for Justin, discussing acquisition methods and timeline for tissue harvesting. The most damning evidence came from Albert himself. Arrogant until the end, he'd kept detailed notes about his research, including entries about Victoria. Subject M. 17 showing concerning behavioral changes. One entry read, increasingly resistant to family authority. Questioning program origins. Recommend termination of subject and preservation of secondary sample, offspring, for continued study. He'd written about his daughter's murder like it was a scientific decision. When Drew took the stand, he kept his composure, answering questions about Victoria, about Justin, about the events leading up to the kidnapping attempt. The prosecutor asked him to identify the photograph Victoria had left behind. That's my wife, Drew said, his voice steady. When she was 7 years old, before the Prestons stole her life. Albert's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Drew's grief, his anger, his determination to protect his son. When the defense cross-examined him, trying to paint Drew as an unstable father who'd overreacted to normal custody discussions, Drew remained calm. My in-laws tried to kidnap my son using sedation gas in a government building, Drew said. I didn't overreact. I protected my child from predators. The defense had no response to that. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Albert Preston, guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and 17 counts of illegal human experimentation. Esther Preston, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted kidnapping, and accessory to illegal human experimentation. Harvey Livingston had already pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and attempted kidnapping in exchange for his testimony. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Albert Preston received life without parole. Esther received 40 years. Harvey got 25 years with possibility of parole after 15. Drew sat in the courtroom as the sentences were read, Justin beside him. The boy was old enough to understand that the people who tried to take him were going to jail for a very long time. Does this mean we're safe now? Justin asked. Yes, buddy, we're safe. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions. Drew ignored them, keeping his hand on Justin's shoulder, guiding him to the car where Kelvin waited. That evening, Drew stood in his backyard, a real house now, not a rental, bought with the settlement from suing Biogenesis Solutions. The company had dissolved, its assets liquidated to compensate victims. Drew had put most of the money in a trust for Justin, keeping only enough to provide stability. He looked at the photograph of young Victoria one last time. Then, carefully, he placed it in a frame alongside a photo of adult Victoria, radiant on their wedding day. He hung both pictures in Justin's room, where the boy could see them every night. Your mother was brave, Drew told his son. She survived things that would have broken most people. And in the end, she made sure you'd be safe. That's what parents do. Justin studied the pictures. I miss her. Me too, buddy. Every day. Later, after Justin was asleep, Drew sat on his porch with a beer, watching the stars. His phone rang. Harrington. Saw the news, the detective said. Hell of a verdict. You made it happen. Without your help. You made it happen, Drew. You fought for your son when everyone else told you to give up. That takes guts. Drew took a long drink. What happens now? With all those other victims? Long road ahead. FDA's conducting a full investigation into genetic research practices. Congress is holding hearings. Some of the survivors are filing lawsuits against the researchers who are still alive. It's going to take years to untangle, but at least it's finally being addressed. Because of Victoria. Because of Victoria, Harrington agreed. She tried to expose this before she died. In a way, she still did. Her death led to all of this. After hanging up, Drew thought about that. Victoria had discovered the truth about her past, and it had killed her. But that discovery had also saved dozens of other children from the same fate. Her death had meaning, purpose. It didn't make Drew miss her less, but it helped. Over the next year, Drew rebuilt his life. He got a promotion at Morrison Engineering. Justin thrived in his new school, making friends, excelling in classes. The nightmares faded, though they never fully disappeared. Drew dated occasionally, but nothing serious. He wasn't ready, might never be ready. Victoria had been his person, and the Prestons had stolen her from him. But he had Justin, and he had justice. It wasn't enough, but it was something. On the 2-year anniversary of Victoria's death, Drew took Justin to her grave. They brought flowers and sat in the grass, talking about memories. Do you think Mommy would be proud of us? Justin asked. Drew looked at his son, 7 now, growing tall, his mother's eyes and his father's determination. He thought about everything they'd survived, everything they'd overcome. I think she'd be very proud, Drew said. We fought for her. We made sure the people who hurt her paid for what they did. And we're still here, still together. That's what matters most. Justin nodded solemnly. Then, with a matter-of-fact tone only children possess, he added, I'm glad you didn't give up on me, Daddy. Even when it was scary. Drew pulled his son close. I will never give up on you. Never. That's a promise. They sat together as the sun set. Father and son, survivors of a nightmare that had tried to destroy them. The Prestons were gone, locked away forever. Biogenesis was dismantled. The truth was finally known. Drew Fowler had won, not just in court, but in the way that mattered most. He protected his son, honored his wife's memory, and ensured that the monsters who'd hurt his family would never hurt anyone else. It had cost him everything. His innocence, his peace of mind, 2 years of living in fear. But looking at Justin's face, safe and healthy and loved, Drew knew it had been worth it. Every single moment. The game was over, and Drew Fowler had played it perfectly. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.